Alas, I need to finish up with Greek art today, which means that the lecture is going to be longer than any of us would like. One of those fasten your seatbelt days. We'll return to the Parthenon now and focus all too briefly on its famous sculptures. I included this computer-generated color reconstruction based on microscopic remnants of paint, but still a kind of scientific best guess, because I wanted to remind you that the Parthenon was not the pristine white monument that American architects copied so diligently. It was brightly, even garishly painted. Let's see more color reconstructions and get a quick overview of the Parthenon sculptures by turning to our Parthenon video briefly once more. So these are not required works, but I've included them because the Greeks' love for machis, or fights between humans and the gods or demigods, tell us a lot about Greek culture and about how they viewed themselves. All of these scary opponents are stand-ins for outsiders that the Greeks have fought and vanquished. On the Parthenon, of course, this means the Persians. So this is a form of Pericles' self-promotion. Remember, everybody, how we Greeks turned back the savage Persian horde. Pericles is, after all, in the fundraising business. The Acropolis makeover did not come cheap. He's selling himself. The entire East Pediment, much of it now destroyed, depicted the birth of Athena from the forehead of Zeus. Here is a proposed reconstruction that's based on the remnants. The birth of Athena took place at dawn, so on the left we see the heads of the horses of Helios, the sun, about to rise above the horizon, pulling behind them the life-giving sun. Note how the horses' faces are full of energy and impending action. So why is this sculpture composed this way? What problem does it need to solve? The Greeks loved to decorate their triangular pediments, but triangles posed a compositional challenge. Just to see how much the Greeks learned, here are pediment sculptures from two archaic temples. Note that the figures are not proportional, although on the bottom artists have begun to figure out that making figures recline helps solve the problem of fitting a narrative into a triangular space. So here's our required image. Note especially the spectacularly rendered drapery and the very clever use of the triangular shape to add motion and variety to the sculpture. The clinging clothing, which reveals more than it conceals, is, believe it or not, actually known as the wet drapery effect. Now you know where we get wet t-shirt contests. Note, too, that the figures actually interact with each other in a way that is compositionally complex and interesting. The high relief casts shadows, and that would increase the impression of movement and volume, especially when you're looking from below. But not all architectural sculpture touched on larger-than-life mythology. Here we see a tender depiction of a young mother being waited on by her maidservant. The somber faces reflect the classical era, but also, presumably, the sad subject. This is, after all, a gravestone. Note that the stele is shaped like a small temple crowned by a pediment. The seated woman is wearing the clothing of the Athenian upper class, while the servant girl is dressed in the long-sleeved dress and headdress worn by barbarians. So this relief sculpture captures two Athenian social realities, the existence of slavery and the relegation of women to a domestic sphere. This is very much, after all, a domestic scene. One theory about this work is that the jewelry the woman was probably holding represented the woman's dowry, which was a significant economic contribution to her husband's household. In this way, the sculpture connects the woman to her husband and father, who would have provided the dowry, and would therefore demonstrate the male dominance of which she was a part. Symbolically, this woman is portrayed as a passive and secluded Athenian, thereby fulfilling the male ideal of a woman's social status in Athens. I talked about this exquisite small temple before and noted that the Athenians erected a parapet wall to make it less quelling to visit. On the left, we see a quintessentially high classical sculpture. And why do I say that? Well, the body is lovely portrayed under the drapery, more clinging and erotic even, I would say, than the bodies on the Parthenon pediment sculptures. I'm not sure there's a more exquisite sculpture of clothing in all of art history. The dynamism of the sculpture, the diagonal lines, the expressiveness of the body, and even the enhanced eroticism, however, all point us in the direction we're moving, which is toward Hellenistic Greece. But before we get moving, let's first catch up with a little history. The parapet wall's repeated images of Nike, victory, had a certain sad irony when this sculpture was made. In 410, when the wall was erected, Athens had already suffered a devastating plague and a number of humiliating defeats in the war it was fighting with Sparta and its allies, the Peloponnesian Wars. Just 6 years later, Athens would surrender to Sparta. Do you remember when I gave you the intriguing question that the College Board will never ask? When does art destroy culture? A pretty strong argument could be made that Pericles' demand for treasure from Athens' allies in the Delian League to build his Acropolis masterpieces, along with Greek city-states' rebellion against Athenian greed and hegemony, helped bring down classical Greece. Fortunately for art history, a new Greek culture would soon emerge. The classical period climaxed and then ended with King Philip of Macedon's conquest of Greece. While the Greeks considered Philip a barbarian, Philip, who had spent much of his youth in Thebes, was a huge admirer of Greek culture. He invited Aristotle to his capital to serve as tutor to his young son, the fellow whom history would call Alexander the Great. This is where we skip a lot of fascinating history. Sorry. We're going to watch a couple of short video clips from a very interesting video about the Macedonians, Alexander the Great, and the Hellenistic world. If you're interested, think about watching the rest. It's up on Moodle. The mosaic we see here depicts Alexander's victory over Darius III, really the climatic moment in his invasion and conquest of the Persian Empire. In some ways, we're getting ahead of our story, since this mosaic actually dates from the early Roman Empire. It was found on the floor of a villa in Pompeii. But as you learned in the podcast, this mosaic was almost certainly a copy of an early 3rd century BC Hellenistic painting. Alexander's breastplate depicts Medusa, the famous Gorgon who turned all who saw her to stone, and his wavy hair is typical of royal portraiture as established in Greek art of the 4th century BCE. He is portrayed sweeping into battle on the left on his famous horse, Bucephalon, and he's focusing his gaze on his adversary, the Persian leader. Darius is shown in a chariot. He seems to be desperately commanding his frightened charioteer to flee the battle, while stretching out his hand either as a mute gesture to Alexander or probably throwing a spear. He had a very worried expression on his face. The charioteer is whipping the horses as he tries to escape. If this mosaic is any guide, Greek painting must have been something else. But what stylistic elements, really stylistic innovations, do you see in this work? Presumably the mosaic artist is imitating the painter. Well, we see radical foreshortening, as in the central horse seen from behind. We see the use of shading to convey a sense of mass and volume and to enhance the effect, the naturalistic effect of the scene. Repeated diagonal spears, clashing metal, and the crowding of men and horses all evoke the din of battle. At the same time, action is arrested by dramatic detail, such as the fallen horse and the Persian soldier in the foreground who watches his own death throes reflected in his shield. Would have loved to see the painting. So here's just a quick look at Alexander's conquests and a map of the Greek world as it's divided among his generals. Man, we're moving fast. So let's begin with the final video clip that shows the world created when Alexander's kingdom was split into several kingdoms. So as you just saw in the video, I hope, these new cities were Greek, but they were a new kind of Greek. The one-time citizen of the polis, an individual Greek city, was now cosmopolitan. Politan means citizen. You heard the root word polis, right? What does cosmos mean? It means world. So let me offer a couple more words that should enter your art history vocabulary. Syncretism means bringing together, merging elements from many cultures. Greek and then Roman religion became increasingly synchronistic in this period, as the religion absorbed concepts from the East. In the next unit, we'll see that Buddhism picks up some artistic influences from the Greeks as well. Oikumene, oikos means household. In Greek terms, the essential family and economic unit. Basically, the scope of both interaction expanded during this period, and so did a sense of fellowship, ecumenical, with people other than Greeks. This non-required small bronze statue beautifully demonstrates the Hellenistic culture, its fascination with and empathy with other cultures. The work is thought to portray a dancer in Alexandria, Egypt, one of the cosmopolitan cities where Greek culture met and married Near Eastern culture. Although the subject appears to be exotic and foreign, the statue exhibits many Greek characteristics. So what are some of those characteristics? It's actually a good review. So we see the twisted figure with chiastic counterbalance, the drapery folds that simultaneously reveal and conceal her form, a sense of movement, and her expressive face all identify this work as Greek rather than Egyptian in style. But the subject captures the new, wider Greece. Oops, I should have blacked this out. It's the altar of Pergamom, 175 BCE. Now we move to a work that is required. You saw the city of Pergamon on the video, and you read about its history in your last assignment. Pergamon was a major Hellenistic capital in what today is western Turkey. The altar was a tribute to King Attalus I's victory against the Gauls. Like many Hellenistic works, it is huge and designed to reflect the king's great wealth as well as his military victory. This altar was located near the royal palace on the city's Acropolis. This is not the actual altar, by the way, but a reconstruction in a museum in Berlin. This model should give you some idea of where the altar fit into the Acropolis. The second photo shows the famous friezes at the bottom of the imposing staircase to the altar. So Attalus I wanted to identify his city with Athens, hence Athena's prominent place in the frieze. As you read, he paid to erect monuments in Athens, but he also used the altar friezes to signal Pergamon's role as the new Athens. So why does a frieze depicting Athena fighting the Titans or giants send the signal? I know I just talked about this earlier in the podcast. Remember, throughout the classical period, giants or centaurs or Amazons were stand-ins for the barbarians that threatened Greece. Frankly, the Gauls that Attalus defeated posed nowhere near the same threat as the Persians did, but Attalus drew the comparison nevertheless, basically for his own aggrandizement. But if the themes were similar, the form of Hellenistic sculpture is very different from that of classical Greece. Compare this Athena with the more sober Athena of the Parthenon. This is an artist's reconstruction, I've managed to turn it up, of the missing center of the East Pediment sculpture. So what do you see? This Athena, our Athena, is an action figure, all movement and dynamism. Vertical lines have given way to diagonal lines. There is much more drama, tension, and emotion in Hellenistic sculpture. Here's another comparison between the Pergamon frieze and Apollo and Artemis from the Parthenon frieze. The high classical style is calm, severe, vertical, and horizontal. The Hellenistic Athena is a dynamo. And note that Nike adjusting her sandals is really a transitional figure in between. So this required work is another quintessential example of Hellenistic sculpture. Nike is Athena in her role as the goddess of victory, and here she's landing on a stone carved to look like a Greek warship. When she still had an arm, it was holding out a wreath to crown the naval victor. Notice how the clothing, again, reveals more than it disguises the body. If anything, it adds to the erotic impact of the piece. The windswept clothing is a masterpiece of delicate carving, while the outflung body goes beyond the classical counterbalancing symmetry of classical sculpture to suggest a kind of asymmetry, movement, even the possibility that any moment she's going to take flight. Note that Hellenistic artists love diagonal lines, which we know gives a sense of movement to works. The statue would have reflected light from the water, which would further enhance the sense of lightness and movement. This is art as high emotional drama, but note also art in service of the state and its glory. Hellenistic art may have been more individualistic, but the honor of the Greek kingdoms will still be celebrated in art. So now let's compare our two Nikes. What similarities and differences do you see between the two statues? Both celebrate Greek victories, both beautifully portray drapery, and more than hint at the body beneath. The dialogue between revealing and concealing is, as we see, not new in Hellenistic art. Both convey movement, but the Nike of Samothrace is more active, more vibrant, and more theatrical. I think of Peter Pan swinging in on those wires. With this bronze, another required work, we return to the popular Greek theme of the magnificent athlete. But how is this athlete different from earlier athletes we've seen? He's battered and bruised. His nose and teeth are broken. Inlaid copper blood drips from cuts on his forehead, nose, and cheeks. Okay, terrible confession time. You will need to know more about bronze casting, and in particular the lost wax method of bronze casting. But we're running out of time, and this particular form of additive sculpture is about to disappear for a millennium. When it reappears, we'll catch up and learn about this technique, I promise. So compare this with an earlier bronze from the High Classical period, no longer required. The statues are superficially similar, but the emotional message and the impact are entirely different. The Riace bronzes, named because they were found in a shipwreck off Riace, have also fallen off the list, but I could imagine you're being asked to identify the period of each of these sculptures. The Riace warrior is classical, the seated boxer is Hellenistic. And with this sculpture, we come to the era of Roman Greece. This work from the early 1st century CE, we haven't seen those initials for a while, was unearthed in Rome in 1506 as Michelangelo looked on and apparently oohed, awed, and learned. The sculpture was found in the remains of the palace of the Roman Emperor Titus. Laocoon was a Trojan priest who saw through the horse offered by the Greeks, and the gods who sided with the Greeks sent sea serpents to strangle him before he could spill the beans. The Trojans interpreted this as the gods punishing Laocoon for lying, and so they welcomed the horse into their city. I hope you know the rest of the story. So this is Hellenistic art at its apogee and used to be one of our students' favorite works, which is why I'm still sticking it in. But note the expressive emotion, the twisted figures, the diagonal lines, the elaborate asymmetrical composition with counterposing balance, the dramatic views from every side. I frankly can't believe this work didn't make the cut because it was so influential in the High Renaissance. But I also can't believe I'm covering it in 30 seconds. My profound apologies. Whew, I've covered a lot of material and really haven't given our required works all the time they deserve, which is why I hope you did your homework. I hate to leave Greece behind, but the clock is ticking, so on to Rome.